Trust is a vital and critical component in every aspect of life. Without trust, almost everything would be compromised, if not outright destroyed. We need trust in relationships. We need trust in communication. We need trust in any given interaction. Trust is, as I said, a vital component. But which criteria define trust? How do we gauge whom to trust? How do you know whom to trust? Which traits and behaviors engender trust? Can these characteristics be acquired? Now, many of us have been hurt and justly wary of trusting another. We've been betrayed. Or sadly, may have even totally lost trust in others. Is it possible to rebuild healthy trust after betrayal? So that's what we're going to be discussing, a very critical component in life, but one, as usual, not spoken about enough and definitely not analyzed and probed. And we're going to dissect the anatomy of trust and trustworthiness and learn what it really means, how to cultivate it, how to make it, even train yourself to be more trusting and also to be more trustworthy. Because this is the key to any solid, healthy relationships where we have safe environments and enduring relationships. So that's the topic of this week's discussion. So where do we begin? Let's talk for a moment, as always, go back to the beginning. The purest form, the most pristine form of the human being is the newborn child. Like freshly fallen snow, a newborn child has not yet been jaded, has not yet been shaped and impacted by parental attitudes, by educational school attitudes, by social pressures and peer pressure and all of life's ups and downs and disappointments and successes. So when you look at a child, we can get a picture of the closest approximation of what we are at our healthiest. So from a purely scientific point of view, the child is the best version, I'd say the perfect version, but the cleanest and healthiest version of who you are in this purest form before it's been shaped and directed and guided and in any ways, shaped is the right word. Yeah. Okay. So look at children. Children we see are both trustworthy, meaning you can trust them, and they trust until they discover that their trust is disappointed. They're disappointed in the people they trust, or that trust is betrayed. But children naturally trust, which can get them into trouble as well. But if you're thinking of a perfect world, trust is a healthy thing, and children have no reason not to trust until they are hurt. And the same thing is children are trustworthy. We're not talking about whether they're reliable. Obviously, they're not mature yet, so they can make mistakes, and you can't just trust them to take care of things. But you can trust them to be sincere, that they don't lie on their own. They won't be duplicitous. And again, until they learn otherwise. So what you see from this is that the human being, each of us, is born both a trustworthy and a trusting person. It's because of life circumstances and life's experiences where that trust is stolen from us, or at least limited and compromised in us. There are 4 personality types, archetypes, that define us all. Check out the description below, a course on the Kabbalah of the 4 elements. And that's first and foremost, due to that trust being violated. So a child will give a parent the benefit of the doubt, and therefore, even if, let's say the child promised that tonight the parent is going to take the child out, and the parent doesn't show up, or even more subtle things, that type of reliability that children just rely on the validation and on the nurturing and on the security of having a parent around, and that parent does not appear, abandons them, or in some ways absentee. So once, twice, 3 times the child has resilience, but after a while, that child will start lowering their expectations and, yes, lowering their trust, because next time someone says to them, trust me, They say, well, you know what? And not necessarily in words, but their unconscious says, I trusted, and it wasn't necessarily, no one lived up to that trust. Now, in extreme cases, that trust really is deeply violated. In more we'll call it more mild forms of it, the trust, it becomes wary. And there's many variations, one level to the next. Obviously, I'm not going to go through all of them. We're talking about the general picture, but you get the idea. So what happens as we lower our expectations and our trust is so-called not lived up to? Promises are broken. The reliability and consistency is not there all the time. The security is taken away from us in some extent. So obviously, in direct proportion to that, the trust will be weakened and wane. That doesn't mean we still don't have within us, because we're born with it innately, that ability to trust, but we just don't allow ourselves to trust because we're afraid. We're afraid of being hurt. So we put up our defenses and we put up our armor and we build that armor. As when we grow into adults, depending on how much trust we had in our lives and how much of it was compromised, that will directly impact how we deal with new people, whether it's in relationships, whether it's in personal, intimate, and romantic relationships, or whether it's in even relationships at work and so on. There'll be in direct proportion to how much that trust was violated, will be the wariness that I'm mentioning, and even the fear and the resistance of really getting involved and always having a back door to escape from, because once we allow ourselves to be vulnerable and we trust, we can be hurt. For those that go the other extreme, that had healthy relationships and there was much to trust, they will find it much easier to go into a relationship because they have trust and they give the person the benefit of the doubt. Now, of course, every mature adult is going to always hopefully have some discretion, because just because you grew up in a trusting environment doesn't mean that every person you can trust. So you'll definitely weigh that. But it's much easier to trust because it hasn't been hurt. If it's been hurt, then everyone's guilty until proven innocent. And in extreme cases, people are continuously seen as not trustworthy, to the point that sometimes a person who's really been violated, been hurt, and abused in that regard will often create a situation where they'll test the other person to the point that they'll almost intentionally sabotage a relationship and say, you see, I couldn't trust you. That becomes unrealistic expectations and basically writing the script of what you expect to happen because it happened in the past, which is that ultimately there's no one to trust. And every person listening to this, every one of us fits somewhere into the spectrum from one end to the other. And the same thing is with that's trusting others. The same thing is being trustworthy. You can argue that they're directly linked to one another. The more trusting you are of another, meaning the more reason you are trusting, the more trustworthy you will also be, because it's reciprocal. However, if you don't trust others, obviously you yourself are not going to make yourself available to be trusted. You'll be evasive, you won't show up. Sometimes you'll just get out of a relationship, you'll end relationships, commitment will be an issue. Is it always the case? Can a person be not trusting others and themselves be trustworthy? That's possible too, because sometimes we feel that we need to please and we need to really bend backwards, so we don't trust others, but we constantly make an effort that we should be trusted. So there again could be different scenarios. I'm not going to go analyze every particular scenario. I just wanted to thoroughly cover at least just in brief the different situations and different scenarios. So then what really lies at the heart of trust once you analyze it this way, once we dissect it and we start with the child within us and as we grow into adults? You see, I would use the word vulnerability. Trust has to do with being vulnerable, because when you trust someone, you're letting them you're allowing them to make a move that can affect you without you putting up all your defenses. In other words, I say I trust you, you may potentially hurt me, you may not live up to my trust. So trust and vulnerability come together, but vulnerability can be a very positive word. For some, vulnerability is very terrifying, especially those that are not trusting people. But vulnerability could also be a very beautiful thing. Like true love, true intimacy, true love is celebrating your vulnerability with another. Because there is that trust where you can let go and you know that person will hold on to you, will embrace you no matter what, in almost an unconditional way. Which is another word. Real trust is connected with certain unconditional love that a parent gives a child, and later in life, hopefully the person that you or your spouse, the person that you commit to and marry in a sacred relationship, will also give you that type of unconditional commitment. But it goes further than that. Because here's the big question. Is trust built on perfection? When you say, I'm trusting someone else, I will be vulnerable, I will rely, I will trust them to deliver what they promised, to protect me because they say they will, and I will take the risk. And then let's say they don't. What happens? In other words, every human being makes mistakes. Is it a result that they abandoned me? Now, if you grew up with that type of experience, so then, as I said, that's your default state psychologically, then you're expecting to be abandoned. You're expecting you're expecting your trust not to be lived up to. However, regardless, even in a healthy form of trust, the fact is there's no perfection. Even when healthy parents, can children always rely that the parent will always be there? There'll be mistakes. People make mistakes. So let's throw now another word which is vital in this equation, and that is accountability. Trust is not built on perfection, it's built on accountability. So it's not about that the person is always going to perfectly provide for me, perfectly protect me, perfectly always be there exactly as I want them to be. That's not a possibility. That's not realistic. We hope in young age, and even in older age, parents will be there, but everyone will make their mistakes. But what we like to know, and this is where trust comes into play, we would like to know that there's accountability on that person's part. If, let's say, your parent promises you something, and let's say they deliver a certain type of security, and for whatever reason they cannot, and they come and apologize. Not that a parent has to necessarily apologize to a child, but apologize nevertheless, because I should have been there, and could have been, and then I wasn't. That accountability compensates for the imperfection of human beings. And that's a tremendous concept. Where they say to err is human, to forgive is divine. Why? Because when there's accountability, you can elicit another dimension in the relationship, because you say, you know what, that person is imperfect. And yes, they may have in some way not been there for me, which would give me good reason and cause not to have trust, but they were accountable. And that accountability compensates. That accountability allows for that nurturing environment that engenders trust. So trust, therefore, you can say, is built on a few things. Number one, that yes, there's someone there for you, in a way, even when it's inconvenient, in a way that's consistent. But in addition to that, even if at times there may be a lapse, there's an accountability. And of course, not a repeat of the same mistake. So you see, when you add that into the picture, it makes a real relationship very, very doable and possible. Because it's not about perfection. Perfection is unrealistic. Perfection is usually expected by people who've really been hurt, and they think the only way I will ever trust if the person is going to be perfect, will never lapse, will never disappoint me. That's not a possibility. But accountability can be expected, and that's what creates the environment for trust, because there's accountability. Let's just use examples in nature. In nature, when you have, for example, just simply, you plant a seed in a garden, an apple seed, a flower seed, whatever it may be. You water the garden, you weed it, and naturally nurturing and will cause this plant to grow. Okay? But let's say there's a drought or there's something else that happens. So look in nature what happens. It compensates, it does something. When there's a forest fire, even though on one hand it destroys the forest, but then the forest regenerates in fascinating ways. So we see in nature there's a built-in immunity system. And that built-in immunity system is also reliable. So though, yes, there may be setbacks, and there may be even worse than that, maybe even disasters, but there's a immunity that bounces back and helps it grow again. So let's apply that now to psychologically. We say the human being is compared to the tree in the field. We too are that way. We have a resilience that even if a trust was betrayed, or even if there was a lapse, or there was some form of betrayal, intentionally or not intentionally, it is that accountability that's our immune system that brings back the greatest of a human being and say, yes, you know why you can trust me? Because I will be accountable. I will tell you and be transparent and upfront. Full disclosure, not a cover-up, not more lies. A lie is the ultimate cause for distrust. When someone lies to you. And so one time you may forgive, a second time you may overlook. But then if it's repeated, at some point you say, I can't rely on this person. They're liars. Accountability is the opposite of a lie. That even if there was a lie, or there was not a lie, but there was something elapse in a person's commitment, there's accountability. That accountability reignites the capacity to have trust. So when people say, trust me, we all know what our reaction is. You think I'm going to trust you because you told me trust me? It's like a line people say, a cliche. No, trust is to be earned. You cannot ask someone to trust you. It's something to be earned, something that with behavior, accountable behavior, reliable behavior, things that are consistent, that I know I can rely on, that engenders and helps trust develop and grow and become a force in people's lives. So we see from this, if you talk about the qualities, what are the qualities that are necessary? That they will call the trustworthy traits. The trustworthy traits, just looking at the actual title. What are they? So number one, they are consistency, reliability, knowing that you're there for the person, even when it's inconvenient. That definitely adds to it. It's not just you're there, but even when it's inconvenient, when a parent will stay up late at night because the child is not well, they may not go to work, and you see clearly they pay a price. The second thing is that I would say three things: the consistency, reliability, even when it's inconvenient, and accountability. Those are the key traits in trust. Obviously, there are more elements to it. Kindness, showing that you are going out of the way to be empathetic, to be sensitive to another person. But it has to be consistent for it to become a trustworthy trait. So that defines what